Everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the iPhone 6 Plus and see how this particular iPhone holds up in 2024. Now, I will definitely tell you, the first thing is first though, this iPhone is 10 years old this year, which is pretty crazy. And I have a special little experience with this iPhone because this was the first iPhone that I ever used as an everyday device when I first picked this thing. So it was actually my mom's iPhone back in the day. And then I ended up getting this thing, I guess, from her because she didn't use it anymore. And she ended up getting a new iPhone. I ended up using this one. It was a white iPhone 6 Plus. And I love this thing. You know, it was a really, really good time that I had with this iPhone. It definitely wasn't perfect though. But for the most part, I had a really good time with it. And I still enjoy this iPhone a lot. Now, I don't think I would recommend the average person to go ahead and buy this iPhone anymore. And I would probably recommend people to buy another type of iPhone. So if you want to buy those ones, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the iPhone 6 Plus, this particular iPhone, in my opinion, was on a league of its own for a little bit of time. This was the first massive iPhone Apple made. Before this, their stereotype was that they just made small iPhones and small phones in general. But this one completely flipped it. This was a very, very big phone. You were getting a 5.5-inch IPS LCD panel on the front, 1080p panel, and it was actually a pretty good panel. So much so, in fact, that even now in 2024, it's really not even that bad of a display. The only thing is that this display does get fairly, it doesn't get that bright, which can be kind of a problem for some people. But I would still say for a lot of people out there, this type of iPhone display was very, very decent. Especially at that time, it was a very, very good display that you were getting on this type of iPhone, which again to me was very cool. Now, on top of that, with this iPhone, you are getting a little bit of bezel on the top and the bottom. Not the biggest deal in the world, but maybe just a small thing for some people. You were getting a Touch ID sensor on this iPhone too, which was still nice to have. That debuted with the iPhone 5S. But still getting it on this iPhone was another really cool thing going on for this particular iPhone as well. And that was kind of it. I loved having a bigger sized phone, and the fact that this thing felt so premium, that was a really cool feature set going on for this particular iPhone at that time. Now on the bottom, you're getting a lightning port, which again is very cool, and you're getting a headphone jack as well. So this kind of stuff in and of itself is a very, very nice thing to have, because when you're getting that type of I/O, lightning and headphone jack, it's a very cool thing to have. This wasn't necessarily the last iPhone with the headphone jack, but this was one of the last iPhones. Pretty much 2 years after this, that was basically it. So I did personally kind of enjoy this iPhone from that particular perspective, and they did kind of kill it in my opinion from that particular side. So when I look at this iPhone, definitely from the front sides and the kind of the sides of this iPhone, definitely some pretty good stuff. On the back side though, you were basically getting this Apple logo. You were getting a single camera setup on the top left, and that was kind of it. There really wasn't anything else super crazy going on for this particular iPhone at that time, and that's kind of what was going on for this particular device. But as I mentioned before, some things that this iPhone didn't have that a lot of iPhones have nowadays are things like a glass back, a much better feeling, phone for the most part. Flat size is another big thing most iPhones have nowadays. A multiple camera setup, this thing did not have it. This phone also did not have any IP certification or wireless charging. Those are some really big things that a lot of modern phones have nowadays that this iPhone doesn't have. And going into even more details, things like an OLED display or a promotion display or anything like that, or face unlocking or anything, this iPhone doesn't have any of those things. So when you think about what I just said, a lot of phones in general have those types of basic necessities nowadays. This phone didn't really have any of those things. So take it as you will, not the biggest deal in the world or anything, but just one minor thing to kind of keep in mind with this particular device. So from that particular perspective, that kind of covers it up there on the outside. Now, on the camera side of things, this iPhone was basically giving you that single 8 megapixel camera on the back and a 1.2 megapixel camera on the front. Now, the thing I will tell you about this particular camera is that when I was using it back in 2016, 2017, this thing really wasn't that bad at all. And I do think having a phone like this, it definitely wasn't that bad of an experience. I think you were definitely getting a pretty decent time and a pretty decent, camera on this thing, which is a pretty cool thing. And if I'm going through and buying a, type of device back then, I definitely would say this camera was actually pretty good for the most part. But nowadays, things are completely different, and you probably would expect this camera is not going to be at that same caliber, at least I would say nowadays, as what it was back then when it was a brand new iPhone, which makes sense. 1080p at 60 on the back, 720p at 30 on the front. That is just really not that good of a camera anymore. And this camera, like I said, I mean, nowadays the things is that it's just like you don't even have any zooming in, zooming out capability. There's barely any stuff there. You can still zoom in a little bit, but it's not as good as the current iPhones with dedicated telephoto lenses. Even like the iPhone 15 doesn't have a telephoto lens, and you're still getting like 10x zoom on that particular iPhone. You're also missing out on things like a ultra-wide camera. There's no 4K on the front or the back of this iPhone either. This is a very outdated, somewhat pixelated camera. And once again, it just doesn't make any sense to go and buy this type of iPhone. You are much better off purchasing a device that is still supported with software and everything like that, and I'll get to that in a second. But with this type of iPhone with its outdated camera, once again, just doesn't really make a lot of sense to buy it, and you're much better off purchasing those newer types of iPhones. So from that particular perspective, that kind of covers it up there as well. Now, in terms of the software side, this is also another reason why this iPhone just really isn't worth buying. The software can either make or break an iPhone, and with this particular device, with the iPhone 6 Plus, you are basically getting an iPhone that just, has been outdated with software for a long period of time. Why would you go ahead and buy this iPhone at this point when you can buy another type of iPhone that may still be supported with software? So with this type of iPhone, I look back at it, and I just don't see why anybody would want to go and buy it, to be honest, from a software perspective as of this point. You would want to buy an iPhone that still has some sort of software updates and software experience and everything like that. And with this type of iPhone, you're not really getting that, which can be kind of a problem for some people. So if I'm going through and purchasing an iPhone, like I said, I want an iPhone that still has some software updates and has some software experience. This thing is not giving you any updates or any, changes at all. So from that particular perspective, it really doesn't make a lot of sense to go ahead and buy this particular iPhone because it just, what's the point? It's just going to be outdated, and it's going to be outdated by the time you buy it anyways. So that's another really big thing to keep in mind as well. On the performance side, this iPhone was actually giving you that Apple A8 chip inside with 1GB of RAM. Now, back at that point, it really wasn't terrible because I was using this iPhone on an everyday basis, and I was basically getting a pretty decent experience. So when I was using this iPhone back then, it really wasn't that bad of a time, and I do think that was actually a pretty big asset for this type of iPhone. Like, it really wasn't that bad at that time, which was really cool. But once again, when you are kind of taking it up a notch and you are buying a newer device, you have to keep in mind that this particular iPhone just really isn't worth buying anymore from a performance perspective either, especially from a software perspective. The performance, like, you could even kind of get away with sometimes on some older devices if it's still supported with software. Otherwise, though, these types of iPhones, when the performance really isn't that great and the software is outdated, just doesn't really make any sense to buy this iPhone. Loading up applications takes a long time, and because there's only 1GB of RAM, it just isn't that great of an experience either because a lot of games and everything like that nowadays are massive. So think of a game like Genshin Impact. Like, it's just not going to run that well on this type of, phone for long periods of time, especially when it comes down to the battery life segment as well. So from that particular perspective, those are some really big things to keep in mind there too. So that kind of covers it up there. And to be honest, when I look at this particular iPhone, it just makes no sense at all to go and buy something like this. You are so much better off purchasing an iPhone that is still supported with software, that still has updates, that still has pretty decent performance. And this type of iPhone is not really giving you that. It's giving you an outdated experience, and it's giving you an iPhone that just really isn't worth buying from any way I could think about it. If you're in the market, the cheapest iPhone I'd recommend buying, or the oldest iPhone I'd recommend buying, would be something like the iPhone XR. That type of iPhone is going to be giving you a much better experience than this particular device. So take it as you will, but when I look at this particular iPhone, that's kind of what I'd recommend doing, is just not buying this one and buying another one that may still be supported with software. So from that particular side, that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that will mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.